we're on. Good morning.
Good morning.
Last week, you had given us on, I believe it was July 21st in the morning, I guess the last of your proposals. You said that you were as far as you could go.
On 3 of them.
Okay, on 3 of them.
We were.
Okay.
On others, we had room to move.
And the 3 you identified were EMS, prevailing rights, or maintenance of standards.
Or past practice.
And overtime, is that
Right.
correct? As far as economics, you said that there's still room to negotiate on that, but because of these 3 issues you identified as, those were as far as you could go, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
What we have given to you today is our package proposal, and I'll generally go over them because a lot of them are the same. The economics, specifically Article 10 and 11 remain the same because there was no movement on it the last time. And the same from the city. We believe that the economic, the wage and the supplemental pays are not a make or break issue. There's still movement, as I understand, on both sides. We can continue to negotiate that. But the issue with the, I'll start off with the EMS, and that's Article 33. And before I go into that, what we are providing to you is our package of proposals, and it is all of the remaining subjects that are left, without, of course, the definitions. But we can work on that once we get that finalized. But it's a package of proposals because it shows that there's concessions and giving on both sides for this package. And what we have right now is a package that we want to try to work with. Now with the EMS, as I've stated before, the only thing that has changed with there from our proposal is we still grandfather in firefighter 1s and firefighter 2s with regard to the 8-year certification requirement. We also give them some outs that we had talked about before. The only difference is that the firefighter 2 EMS, after remaining in the rank for 10 years, would be able to rotate on and off for a year out of every 3 years. It started off a year out of every 4 years, and we did 18 months out of every 4, and we moved it to 1 out of 3. Now the deal with the EMS is that you're proposing a permanent voluntary demotion. We cannot agree to a permanent voluntary demotion. It's going to have to be some sort of rotation. Now there's movement on how that rotation, we can negotiate on how that rotation may happen, and that's what we've put on the proposals. But as
Wait,
far
say that again?
There's, what we're proposing is an out for the firefighter 2s in terms of a rotation, something that's not permanent, because we feel that if there was a permanent demotion, that would create a void in filling the ambulance duty that we've been worried about and that we need to fill. So what we're proposing, as far as we can go with that, is it has to be a rotation, but it can't be permanent. And we're willing to talk about. That's why I put those issues on the table, and I've moved on my own with regard to how the rotation works, but we're willing to talk about how a rotation such as that would work, and in terms of how many years in rank, how many years or how much time on and off, etc. So basically we can't agree to something permanent, but we're willing to talk about a rotation, and what we've put on our proposal is we've been trying to figure that out. With regard to past practice on Article 35, one of the things that we are concerned about is, yes, we're including a complete agreement because we want both parties to be clear as to what the agreements and what the concessions and the givings were between both parties in order to come to this agreement, and in order to what was the result of collective bargaining and negotiation. With regard to past practice, we're still standing on our proposal that past practice would be established by mutual understanding or a letter, basically kind of a memorandum of understanding that would be attached to the contract with regard to the past practice limited to that contract. We're open to follow up with you on maybe talking through that issue where both parties are involved with the past practice in determining that, and I think that would open communication up between the two parties, and that would help establish what a past practice is, and there would be less, I guess, less confusion on that part.
Well, the problem with your past practice section of this article is simply that the city retains 100% control in determining when past practices exist, because it's only by agreement. So, your current proposal is worse from our perspective than a previous proposal you made, in which the city did not retain that unilateral control. But
well,
I want you to understand that the way you've written past practice writes past practice out of the agreement, because it means that there is no such thing as past practice. What there is if we can get you to agree that a practice constitutes a past practice, then we have one. But if we can't get that, so you in effect veto any past practice argument that we have. So what you've done is you've strengthened your management rights, you've added a complete agreement clause, and then you essentially eliminated past practice for us. And that's why we can't agree to that. I think this whole contract's going to go down in flames on that one issue alone. And it's, it's something that is common in collective bargaining agreements. It's not only common in collective bargaining agreements, but you have one in your police collective bargaining agreement here. You haven't even asked them to change the language of their own past practice. I think they call it prevailing rights. It's much broader than the language that I have proposed, much broader. I'll tell you what, if you would give us the word for word past practice that the police have in their contract, we'll agree to it. In fact, I proposed that once earlier, but y'all rejected it. And it seems to me that is a good place to be. Let's give us, this is not an economic item. Give us the same thing that the police have.
I beg to differ. I think that past practice definitely does have economic implications. It could most certainly be an economic item, and that's one of the issues. One of the issues that we have to deal with as a city when we have to budget and maintain our budget and our fiscal responsibilities and maintain what we have to under the law and the Constitution. We have to make sure that we fund for liabilities. Past practice may create something that we're just not, that we don't know that we have to fund. It may create an implication that we try to, even though we're not bound by the contract, we try to change, we're trying to change something and the economics are impacted there. It may be additional cost to the city. So I think even though I understand what you're saying, that it's a principle, it's a non-economic, generally non-economic item, but it does have economic implications. So it is what you, I guess, essentially a hybrid. It's can be non-economic and economic, and we just don't know.
Well, I guess that's true of every article of the contract. That every article of the contract can, in some circumstances, have economic implications. If you go to Impasse and, binding interest arbitration imposes terms, that has economic consequences. So yeah, everything can have economic consequences, but of course the argument I'm always going to come back to is simply this. Why are you worried about those economic consequences with regards to the firefighters but not the police?
Craig, I've made it clear that we're negotiating the fire contract here. We've had issues, we had initial items to put on a deadline to do that. We've been doing that, and we're working with what the fire department, the fire union, and the city have to deal with it during these negotiations. And when we came to sit at the table, we both agreed to negotiate a new contract which made every single item an issue. Okay, here and this. So we've had to negotiate every single item that we want to include in the contract on both sides. Police negotiations is separate and apart. There were different negotiations, different concessions made by both parties over there, different things that were looked at, different factors, et cetera, and it has nothing to do with what we're dealing at here on the table today.
Roxy, the problem with what you just said is you changed the arguments you've been making. You have told us previously that we have to do away with past practice for us because we shot ourselves in the foot by actually filing a grievance under the maintenance of standards, or grievances under the maintenance of standards clause. And yeah, I agree with you. We did agree to renegotiate this entire contract. And we've done that. We've looked at every article. We've improved it greatly. We've done a lot of good work here. But that doesn't mean that we're just going to throw everything out that's meaningful for the firefighters. And you know, this is a very meaningful provision of the contract. It is the trust factor. We've given you things that would greatly enhance your ability in arbitration to protect your true economic interests with regards to past practice. But we're asking for that safety net that is enjoyed by firefighters throughout the state that have collective bargaining, and is enjoyed by your own police officers, and has been for a number of years. And you're talking about a provision that's been in the fire contract for over 40 years. And I'm not hearing you disagree with me that you essentially have eliminated it from the contract with this language, which is, you know, you couldn't defend that position if you took it.
Well, two things, Craig. First, I think that you've taken what I said out of context. I believe we were talking about voluntary demotions at that time when I said that phrase. I think you're mischaracterizing my argument. And thirdly, I believe that what we're putting on the table does eliminate the ability for the fire union to unilaterally declare a past practice, but it doesn't eliminate it entirely. It creates the ability for both parties to be involved in creating that past practice. Such as it would have happened if it were an issue to be placed on the collective bargaining table during a collective bargaining session. If it were an item that you would have put that was important, becomes important at the time. And you have to be mindful that these contracts don't last forever. There's a term to these contracts. So during these contracts, you can work out, you point out, oh, this becomes a priority for the fire union, and I think we need to place this on the table. This may be something that we believe is a past practice and that we wanted established now in the contract. So we're not eliminating any of those opportunities.
Well, of course you are. Number one, you did make that argument. I'm not taking it out of context. You made it more than once. And fortunately for both of us, your arguments are on tape. So whether you're right or I'm right about that, the tapes will speak for themselves. And you made it abundantly clear more than once that it was the firefighters' use of past practice that raised the city's concerns. The second thing is, it is absolutely inaccurate to say that under the current contract, the firefighters unilaterally can establish a past practice. The way a past practice is established is that the parties act in a certain manner over a period of time, thus establishing an expectation that they will continue thus to operate. If the firefighters feel a past practice exists under the current contract and the city disagrees, that's when you have grievances, and an arbitrator ultimately decides if the firefighters can marshal facts to establish a past practice. We had one, and only one, past practice grievance go to arbitration in the last term so far, and we lost. We weren't able to establish that the past practice trumped the language of the contract. So, we can talk till the cows come home about this, but the truth is, you've stripped past practice out of the agreement entirely with your current proposal. You backtracked on a proposal you previously made that was better for us than this, although it wasn't good enough. Don't want to mislead you about that. I think it's a shame that the contract is going to break down on this article.
Well, Craig, I think when you take each provision piecemeal, I can see where you're coming up with that argument, but where we're looking at collective bargaining, it's a give and take. And, you know, when we're looking at the past, even putting the past practice in the contract, that was with the consideration of all the other articles that were still outstanding, including EMS and wages and ad pays or supplemental pays. You know, one of the things that you had claimed, that the fire union had claimed was a past practice, was this voluntary demotion deal and the firefighter one's ability to get off of the ambulance. We went ahead and grandfathered that in. We included that in towards the end, you know, with our subsequent proposals. So
I'm not understanding that from your current proposal. What I see in your current proposal is that when a firefighter 2 EMS has 8 years, they cannot voluntarily demote. What you created in lieu of that is a system whereby they can rotate off the ambulance for a year every 3 years, as I understand your proposal.
I misspoke. There was an ability to get off the ambulance rotation for both a firefighter 1 and a firefighter 2.
Well, you know, I think that the real solution to the EMS problem is not your proposal, but, you know, we've offered a 14-month moratorium. And what I really think the parties need to do is to use that period to come up with a more permanent and long-lasting solution in light of the new facts that are on the ground. And I'm talking about these classes coming in and where there continues to be a problem. But, you know, so there are ways to work on that, but they would require us to kind of, you know, kick the can down the road, which I think is something you're not interested in. I said at the start of these negotiations, we ought to do IBB and try and come up with a win-win solution. I still think a win-win solution is doable. My guys have a lot of good ideas about how to do that. I'm sure the fire department does too. They just haven't been able to share them because we've been trying to do it here at the table with everything else that's going on. So I don't think EMS is really ultimately the sticker. You know, the sticker is, you know, well, let's just keep going. I mean, it's past practice, and I think it's probably going to be overtime too, but I haven't seen your overtime proposal yet.
No, overtime stays the same at this point.
Well, what does that mean at this point? I mean, this is the end of negotiations. We're not coming back after today.
This is where we're at with the overtime. It
So
needs
this
to
is,
be,
what these proposals represent your last best offer. It's either accept this or go to the next step. I mean, I want to understand. I understand that you say you have more movement on economics. I would urge you to put your best economic proposal on the table because, I mean, we can keep going back and forth about that all day. It ultimately may not make a difference, but if you're trying to entice us to accept the deal, I would ask you to put your best proposal on the table.
well, this is the best that we have for today. I'm telling you on the economics, there may be room for negotiations on the EMS as long as it's a non-permanent ambulance, getting off the ambulance rotation or reassignment. That's where we can move. We cannot agree to a permanent issue. Past practice is probably the biggest stickler with on both parties. And
Okay.
as of right now, the overtime, that's my authority at this point. It has to be for hours actually worked.
Okay, I understand that. Again, I'm going to tell you that we're being treated differently than the police, and we don't understand why. And, you know, again, it's just that you've had a big overtime budget the last 2 years, and that's simply a function of inadequate staffing. And you corrected that problem now. Your overtime budget is going to correct itself. So you're fixing a problem that doesn't really exist or isn't going to exist, but you're doing it on the backs of the firefighters.
But the issue is that also that there are people who are getting overtime who haven't actually worked the full hours to begin with.
Roxy, you know, that argument just doesn't hold up. I mean, you're treating the FLSA as, you know, the end-all be-all. All kinds of employees throughout all kinds of sectors have better overtime rights than what the FLSA requires. It's like me saying to you, well, Roxy, I'm going to cut your salary by $2,000 a year. And you say, well, that's not fair. I say, well, the FLSA just requires me to pay you minimum wage, and you're still making way more than that. So I don't see why you say I'm not being fair. You're talking about cutting the wages of firefighters by your own estimate, on average, about $3,000 a year. And you're telling me that's fair because that's all the law requires. And you're right, that's all the FLSA may require. But at the same time, you're talking about cutting the pay of firefighters on average more than they're getting in a pay raise. And I don't understand why the city can't understand that that's an insurmountable problem for us. I can agree to it at the table, and it'll get shot down. The firefighters will vote against it. So, you know, you're putting me in a box that I can't get out of.
And the money that we're putting on the table is guaranteed wages. Overtime is only paid when overtime is, you know, when somebody is entitled to overtime. So those aren't necessarily guaranteed that you're gonna get those overtime hours.
It's not, but you can't get around the argument that I'm making, that you're asking the firefighters to do more for less. You know, that's Target's slogan, expect more, pay less. It is not the City of Corpus Christi's slogan. But that's what you're doing to us.
We're expecting what we already should be expecting, for them to work their full hours.
Excuse me.
So,
again, that argument doesn't hold up. I mean, why, you know, the same argument could be applied to the police department. Why don't you do it to the police then? Why didn't you propose it to the police, that you cut their pay when they do overtime by only paying them for hours over a certain threshold, but you didn't?
Craig, I'm not talking about police negotiations here at the fire negotiations.
I'm
That's
just raising
separate
it
and
as an
apart.
issue of fundamental fairness. You know, both of these groups have certain benefits that
So-
they've enjoyed for years. You're taking it away only from one group.
When you're talking about fundamental fairness, everybody who's entitled to overtime at the city that are general employees, not subject to collective bargaining, they actually have to work their hours before they're entitled to overtime.
You know, a lot of them don't have near the overtime expectations. Probably the very great majority of them don't have the kind of overtime expectations that you put on police and fire. So you're really comparing apples to oranges, okay? I mean, you know, these guys have regularly scheduled overtime hours.
And
they
that's
already,
not, and we're not affecting,
No, you're not. You're not.
those.
And
We're
then they
talking about
have-
unscheduled callback time.
Right, and you're expecting to say,
So we're not
according to your own
touching-
figures, $1 million a year, which we costed out, and that's $3,000
Yeah, and
pay
we're-
cut on average for
We're
firefighters.
not touching the regularly scheduled overtime at all.
I got
We're
you.
talking about callback whenever we have to get coverage for someone who's sick, takes leave, you know, or if we don't have the staffing.
And you're creating a very difficult situation for the firefighters, but also for the city. You're going to find that firefighters who are voluntarily coming forward to work overtime are not going to want to do it. You're going to have trouble suddenly getting overtime. You're pushing people to desert on their EMS. I mean, you know, it's all stick with you guys. There's no carrot. And so, you know, you're going to see what happens when you take that approach. It is counterproductive. You're making it hard for your fire department to operate. And, you know, I can't make you make a proposal, but we're just holding out for the status quo. And that obviously doesn't work for you guys. So we'll just go to the next step.
I do want to raise one issue that came, that I noticed when we're talking about concessions and issues and what we have progressed on during our collective bargaining period. And that is the concessions that have been made by both parties, because, you know, if you make a concession, it has to be meaningful and worth something to you. If we make a concession on the city side, it has to be meaningful and worth something to us as well. That's the principle of collective bargaining and negotiation. So I'm proposing to reopen up and amend the impasse procedure, TA 28, and only on, it'll take me a second to open it. But it's a very, very small addition. And while mine's opening up, I think I believe it's section F, if you have yours open. I don't have mine, but as I recall, I believe it's section F, and it's factors, I guess affecting the fact finder's recommendation, I believe is the title, and it starts on page 2, but the bullet points go on to page 3. I've just added one of those factors, and I think it's important for both parties, that a factor that's considered are the concessions that are being made throughout that have been made through the collective bargaining period. And what I mean by that is if, for instance, there's several issues and it becomes a package proposal that the fact finder understands that there may have been concessions that were made by one party in the hopes of arriving at a concession from the other party with regard to another proposal that may be subject to the fact finding.
So, is the idea that, are you talking about economic concessions, or are you talking about concessions generally?
Generally, I think it could be economic or non-economic. I think it could be a mixture of both as well.
Okay.
If you're willing, if the firefighters are willing to take a cut in some economic way, expecting an additional right, I think that's something that the fact finder, if that becomes an issue for the fact finder, I think that becomes important in terms of what the collective bargaining is supposed to accomplish.
That really misapprehends the nature of collective bargaining. I think I could go one by one with every employee on your team and ask you, when's the last time you worked in 1 year for less than you made the prior year? In other words, you voluntarily took a pay cut. And I think no member of your team would say, oh yeah, my pay got cut from 1 year to the next. The idea that firefighters are going to, that the only way they can meet this thing is to, or a way that they can meet this is, will they agree to a pay cut?
No, Craig, that was an example. I was just trying to give an example. Like, okay, the city's putting money on the table and puts money on the table, what are they gonna get for that money? I think that they need to be able to show this is what we wanted, or what this money is valued for us. Or if we're gonna cut, if we're gonna add money to that, what do we get in return? I mean, isn't that the nature of negotiations and collective bargaining?
There's always back and forth.
Right.
But of course, there's not only concessions that you make that are different from the last time, but, concessions that you make that are continuing obligations. Right now, you're allowed deviations from the hiring provisions. You're allowed deviations in terms of the appointments you make. We've agreed to concessions in terms of management rights, the addition of a complete agreement clause. And whether they're ongoing or new concessions, I don't think, I don't know that it really matters whether it's in here or not. I don't think an arbitrator worth his or her salt would give this any kind of emphasis at all. So it kind of surprises me, because what it tells me is the city kind of misunderstands the nature of the concessions that the firefighters have been asked to make and have made in these contract talks. You said the other day, we're the only ones giving anything. Well, of course, that's not true. My people feel the same way. We're the only ones giving anything. I don't know if your budget is set yet, but I think all of your non-public safety employees are going to get a pay raise in October. They got a pay raise last October. We didn't get a pay raise last October, and we probably won't get one this October either, the way things are looking right now. So, I don't understand why we're resurrecting the impasse procedure at this point, but it is what it is. It's a proposal you've made.
Okay, you can just consider it and reject it, or if you want.
Well,
the concept of trade-offs or offsets, that what you're talking about.
That's right.
That's implicit in the process. I don't think an arbitrator needs to have it delineated as a factor to be considered, because it's implicit.
Let's just keep going, Roxy.
Okay. I'm having issues with my internet. So I think we've gone over the major issues, that there's other, that we can still negotiate on, like we both talked about, like Article 10 and 11,
Well, let's just,
the
yeah.
the appointment of deputy chiefs, et cetera, but
I
think
see
we've
that
pointed
appointing
out.
deputies is at 5 still.
Yeah, I think we've pointed out the, 3 main issues that,
Can we
and I
talk
think-
about association rights for a minute? I don't know why on association rights y'all are continuing to ask that we compensate for all salary and benefits. Again, I'm going back to the police contract, but they get 1.5 positions off, and all they compensate for is base salary, and they do it out of their sick leave. So it's just another area where you're giving them a better deal than you're giving us, and we're not clear on why the insistence on this particular one. This is one where it seems to me you could have agreed with our proposal, it wouldn't have cost you at all. And so I'm not sure why.
But you saying it wouldn't cost us at all, it wouldn't cost us more? Is that
Yeah,
what
it
you're
wouldn't
talking about?
cost you more. In fact, it would cost you less because we already made a concession. We already agreed to put in more than we're putting in now. We're putting in more and we're getting less than the police get. I mean, again, on all of these issues, we'll agree to what the police get if that'll get us to an agreement. You know, overtime, president's time off, give us what the police get and let's go home. But let me go back to EMS for a minute and let's brainstorm for a minute. What about the idea of having a 2-year collective bargaining agreement and giving you and I'm saying this with giving you a longer moratorium. Right now we proposed a year. Giving you a longer moratorium and we work something out in the meantime.
Now, when you're proposing a 2-year collective bargaining agreement on the EMS issue, does that include, are you?
No, not on the EMS issue,
Oh.
on just do 2-year agreement. Just make it run through the end of September 2017.
But this would include all of your proposals with regard to voluntary demotion, past practice, everything as you proposed it on the 21st?
Well, past practice, I can't get you around, but but there again, it would only take, it would only be a 2-year contract, and then you can take another run at it in 2 years. And you'd have 2 years more of experience under it to see if in fact it continues to be a problem. So that's a way that we might be able to get to a solution. But yeah, I can't promise you that we can give more than we've given on past practice. I mean, the past practice language already that I've given you in the context of complete agreement and management rights is already a concession, and a fairly large one. But, I just got to tell you, I feel like the city is overreaching here, and that they've already gotten some major concessions from the firefighters in areas that they said were important to them, and that's just not good enough. You got it. You're going to go for the trifecta, and as a result, what we're going to have is just a bunch more turmoil, when that's really not what we need. We've given you an extra appointment. That's not enough. We, I think continued many things that are in there, that's not good enough. We've given you a complete agreement clause. It's never been in the contract for 40 years. That's not good enough. We bolstered management rights. That's not good enough. Now you're adding language to that impasse procedure that makes it seem to me like you feel like we haven't made any concessions. And that's just not true. We've made lots of concessions. We've agreed to pay more for our president's time off, but it's not good enough. It's just one thing after another with you guys. It's, you'll take what we give you, but it's not good enough. And, past practice is like incredibly important to the firefighters. And you're just asking that we, surrender it, lock, stock, and barrel. We can't do that. Now, I told you that from day one. I spoke to the city manager and I told him that. But the message just isn't getting through, so.
I'll explore the,
2-year contract.
2-year contract, see if that's something that would be viable or something that could bridge some of the gaps that we have on the past practice and the overtime. And the EMS, I think could eventually be worked out.
Well, a 2-year contract.
With a 2-year contract.
You know, you got a 1-year moratorium automatic, and then if you still have a problem at the end of that year, the chief can declare an additional moratorium. So you do have the ability to control events with a 2-year contract, and we sit down, LMR committee or however, and we work that one out. But we could all, you know, but I mean, I think that a 2-year contract would enable you to, you know, accept maybe that, you know, in deputy chiefs, you're getting an extra appointment, but not 2. Those kinds of things. You'll have another chance to take a run at it in a couple of years. And by the same token, we'll have another chance to revisit these issues too in a couple of years. So that may be the best way to go. Well, not for you.
No, why not get an issue at all? Ambulance will be taken care of, overtime will be taken care of.
That's right. You know, we're looking and thinking that some of these things like the overtime and the ambulance are gonna work themselves out. But in 2 years, we'll know for sure. Now we see in a mirror dimly.
Okay, I'll explore the 2-year agreement. Okay, that's all I have for today.
Well,
I'll go back to the, I'll
no, we
continue
asked y'all
to-
to hang around for a minute. I'm
Okay.
gonna come visit with you after I talk to my team
sure.
and see, you know, where and how we might go from